Hello, and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Planet Policy Pals. Okay, I don't know what that was. We're the Planet Policy Pals. Hey. I'm Ala, and my great friend Ajwa's here. Hey girl.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. You know what? Recently, guys, I think that I realized that Ajwa might be my best friend after my boyfriend, my siblings, my mother, and my dog. So
It wasn't recent. She's known for a while.
it was
She's just
recent.
been living in
I
denial.
don't. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, what's new with you, Ajwa?
Not much. I finally get to go back home.
Yes, that's true. That's a long trip, though.
That is a long trip. I'm traveling. It's going to be, I'm excited.
So we are currently continuing our series on the interactions between big industries and the environment. Last week we talked about how meat became popular, the environmental impact of meat, like we gave y'all a lot of information. And we also talked about some ways that maybe it could be more sustainable, looking at industrialized stuff, factory farming, that sort of thing. This week, we will continue talking about meat, but we're going to look at some tangible practices, more like how are people consuming this stuff? How are people producing this stuff? What is going on? That sort of thing. Before we get into that, Ruth had a question regarding regulations of textiles in the US. So if you guys remember a couple episodes ago, episode 7 and 8, I think, we did the fashion industry, textiles, and environment. So our question is, since we discussed regulatory efforts in Europe and the textile industry, are there international boards, or do countries have boards that regulate this industry and waste? Particularly, how is this regulated in the United States? So that's a great question. In the US, the textile industry is regulated as a manufacturing industry, and the emissions are guided by two acts, first RECRA and then NESHAP. Currently, the Biden administration has not made any notable changes to regulations that guide textile and fashion, but there actually has been a lot of push from different people in the industry and outside the industry asking Biden to appoint a fashion czar, so we'll see how that goes. My mom actually asked a similar question about how we can get governments to regulate the fashion industry. And I think this pressure that we're seeing here in the US is a great example of how. But Ajwa, can you talk more about how the RECRA and NESHAP regulations work, and maybe what we really need the Biden administration to do here in the US?
So what we already have in the US are some of the following regulations. For starters, we have the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program. And like you said, these are all industrial standards. Now, this requires reporting of greenhouse gas data and any other relevant information from basically any large GHG emission source. And that's why, like Ala and I said, it is standardized as an industrial plant. So it's not limited to textiles. But then, like Ala talked about, the NESHAP, which is the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. And they have these standards for printing, coating, and dyeing of fabrics. Now, these are specifically for textile. However, they have this industrial process cooling towers. Again, this is not limited to textile, but textile industries do have to abide by these regulations. And then finally, which is actually specified for textile, is the leather finishing operation, because the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, has identified these facilities as major sources of emissions of the hazardous air pollutants, such as glycol ethers, toluene, and xylene. For the water regulations, EPA has, again, with the leather tanning and finishing effluent guidelines and standards that they set up in 1974, and then they amended that regulation in 1977, again in 82, 88, and then consequently in 1996.
Can I just say, I recently had to read the 40 CFR that guides all of this stuff. I had to read the whole thing. It was so long.
No, but hey, at least now you know at least the water regulations for all these things.
Yes.
But these regulatory requirements are then incorporated into permits for direct discharge. So wherever they're going to meet into different water bodies such as streams, lakes, or oceans, and then other permits or like other control mechanisms for indirect discharges. And while it's true that governments do need to act to shape the textile industry so that it's better for the environmental returns, however, there is obviously less agreement over to the degree to which the state should use health, environmental, or animal welfare considerations so that they can control the supply through interventions that affect the production or sale or processing. Like, again, we talk about freedom.
Right.
So it really does come back to how much control we're ready and willing to give our governments over our production systems.
Yes, especially like you said, the U.S. is, we say this a lot, the U.S. is always an interesting place to look at with these type of things because of the powers that state have. I think the biggest problem we have is that regulation is missing to control textile waste. Like a lot of the regulations we have in the U.S. right now focus on what you do during the processing as far as emissions, but we still have a problem. And the U.S. problem is more of a consumption than a production, since it's not that big a producer compared to other countries, but we are the biggest consumer. So what we need is maybe some better recycling programs or labeling, things like that, that force or encourage people not to waste.
Yeah, guys, shop from Salvation Army.
Yeah.
Or the real. Could be the fake, but it's not. It's the real.
There you go. So let's jump into this week where, like I said, we're going to be looking at this producers and consumers, some regulations. I think this episode, we're really going to focus on how our culture drives our meat consumption and production. Even if the world were to eliminate the use of fossil fuels right now, unless overconsumption of meat is eliminated and reduced to sustainable levels, the Earth is still likely to face more than 2 degrees of global warming by 2050. A lot of times when we talk about reaching that Paris Climate Agreement goal, people talk about fossil fuels, energy sector, transportation sector, and they should. But meat is contributing a lot to those GHGs, and it's because of how much we eat it. So Audra is going to tell us about some culprits and trendsetters in the consumption of meat. Take it away, girl.
So when we talk about countries that eat the most meat, as last recorded in 2018, of course, United States tops the list.
Of course.
With 219 pounds per capita meat, which is followed by Australia with their love for grilling, with 203 pounds per capita, and then with Argentina and Israel trailing right behind them. We do have the graph up in show notes, so do take a look at that.
Yes.
And when we talk about consumers, of course, we must talk about sustainable consumers because this can be done right. So in 2018, the rankings that considered food waste, sustainable agriculture, and nutritional challenges, we got at the top France. So France don't do everything wrong. France actually does some things right, you guys.
Some.
Followed by Netherlands, Canada, Finland, and then Japan. An interesting one was Denmark and Czech Republic that tied for the 6th and 7th place. And then the rest was, of course, mostly Europe, Sweden, Austria, and Hungary. But an interesting point to note here is that other than Canada, we didn't get any of the high meat consumers on the top of the sustainable list. But after Ala tells you about the top production countries, maybe you'll understand why.
Yeah, it'll shock you guys. You're not ready. I was not ready.
Yep, you are not. According to Martin Coring, who's the index's author, he believes that France has been in the vanguard of policies and measures to reduce such losses. So the country introduced legislation back in 2016 that required supermarkets to redistribute any leftover food to charities. So as part of a set of proposals that was published in 2015 against food waste.
I love that.
Right? I thought that was so nice.
Mm-hmm.
Every year, consumers in France waste about 67.2 kilograms of food per person compared to 95.1 in the United States, 87.1 in Belgium, and 78.2 in kilograms in Canada.
This is really upsetting to me. It's really sad, right? Because if kids don't pay for lunch in schools in America, they don't feed them and they'll waste the food. You can't even sneak them food. Like, they would rather waste and throw away the food than give these kids free food.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Can you imagine doing that to kids? Kids, come on.
Exactly, while we waste this much food.
No, for sure. But the good thing is, France, on the other hand, the reason France is doing so well is because they're pressing ahead with an agroecology policy, which they are like the minister says its aim is to shift agriculture towards the objective of combining economic, environmental, and social performance. So, agroecology is the application of ecological concepts and principles in farming. So what it does is it promotes farming practices that would work with wildlife. It would help manage the impact of farming on wildlife and harnessing nature. So that will do the hard work for us, such as pollinating crops and controlling pests.
That's smart.
Yeah, and France is continually showing that improvements in agricultural performance should not come at the expense of environmental and social conditions.
Right.
In fact, by 2025, most French farmers are expected to sign on to a set of sustainable practices, which include crop rotation and decreasing their dependence on chemical fertilizers.
This is amazing because French people love cheese, they love milk, they love meats.
And they're going to continue enjoying all of these things, just not at the cost of the environment anymore. Honestly, as long as you can sustainably live a lifestyle, that's fine, do whatever, just circular economy.
Yeah.
On this list, Rwanda, an interesting entry, despite high levels of hunger, scored high due to healthier and sustainable agricultural practices. China scored low as a result of high levels of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Mm-hmm. The US, like we know, also scored poorly, and this was due to a number of factors, including a high level of GHG emissions from the agriculture sector. They have a low proportion of land that is set aside for organic farming, which is like less than 1% of the total.
Expected.
Yeah. And a relatively large amount of land, which is around 22%, that is devoted to biofeed production and animal feed. Britain had high greenhouse gas emissions as well from agriculture, and it also scored poorly on water management.
I believe it.
France also topped the index last year.
Yeah.
But we have seen that research suggests that people in developing nations produce and consume less meat. Why do you think this is? And what do you think is a lesson that developed nations can learn here?
I think it comes down to being very cultural. And it's somewhat financial as well, like how much access you have. I think we should also keep in mind that sometimes, for whatever reason, consuming more meat and things like that is seen as a symbol of status. So China is a great example of this, and we're going to talk a little bit more in this episode. But as people start earning more money, they tend to buy more meat in their diets. So that could be a thing too. I do think that developed nations could borrow from these developing nations in terms of mixing up the food that they eat, mixing up the meals that they have. You know what I mean? Not everything you eat has to be meat and something else. And this is rich coming from me because I love meat.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. I think that we can very easily, like we talked earlier about circular economy, I think we can very easily substitute.
Right.
But I think also we know that the reason why developing nations do consume less meat has more to do with poverty. Mm-hmm. Indians, however, for example, have 35% vegetarian people, but I think that's also because of religious reasons.
Yes. Speaking of India, right? Even though 35% of them are vegetarian, I was shocked to find out that India was number 5 in 2020 for the world's beef production. So the US is 1. Brazil and the European Union, combined with the US, account for roughly 50% of the world's beef production.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And China and India are number 4 and 5, which all these vegetarian dishes in both those cultures. I was kind of shocked to find that.
I think India exports meat to Pakistan, interestingly.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I guess this is like a big exporting industry for them. Historically speaking, for the entire meat industry as of 2018, China was number one with 88.46 million tons. The United States with 46.83 million tons. India was third with 7.45 million tons. That drop where you go from 47 to 8 is kind of crazy. And the UK comes in fourth with 4.09 million tons. The reason that we see this discrepancy between beef and meat in general is because pig meat is the most popular meat consumed worldwide, followed by poultry. Interestingly.
Not surprised, actually.
You're not? I was a little surprised because I was like, well, there's a lot of Muslim nations. I know they're not consuming
the pig meat,
pork.
yes. The poultry, no.
Yeah, the poultry is for sure not a surprise. So these are the people that are producing some of the worst, right? Let's get into just three of them a little bit. I know we've been talking about the US and China a lot in the past few episodes, but it's not our fault, guys. We decided to focus on big industries and the environment, and these are the guys topping it. What do you want me to tell you? So the United States accounts for roughly 20% of the world's beef production. This was from 2020, all by itself, right? And the crazy thing is, the following companies, JBS, Tyson Foods, Cargill, BRF, and Smithfield, are the world's largest meat-producing corporations. And those companies alone account for, I think, about 60% of the amount of meat that we're consuming, all right? 3 out of 5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. 3 out of 5 of those companies are American. Tyson is American. We all know Tyson Chicken. Cargill is American. JBS is a little more complicated. It's an American company owned by Brazilians. So JBS is owned by JBS SA. And around 80-90% of the U.S. water consumption is dedicated to agriculture production.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Right. That's a lot. And it can be up to 90% in some states. For animals, I think Ajwa talked about this last episode, about how this includes like every single practice, how much crops you're growing, the feed, the grass, the water used to scald them, any water used to cleanse or process meat. So all of this is coming into account here. Ironically, and this one shocked me, a recent study found that America has the most sustainable beef industry per how much is produced. And of course, like we've talked about the problems in America a lot. So let's talk about the problems in Brazil. Beef production is the major cause of deforestation in the Amazon.
As we know. Bolsonaro and his infamous policies.
I cannot stand that man. The thing is, the rainforest is disappearing, right? And it's also adding to the greenhouse effect because you're reversing the process of carbon sequestration, where we use plants to kind of capture at least some of these emissions. And the carbon-rich forest is burned down for farming. An estimated 60 to 70% of the deforested land in Brazil is used for cattle ranching. The average for carbon dioxide emissions caused by beef production in Brazil is twice as high as that in Europe. If we take a look at China, this is a very interesting case because up until the early 1990s, people in China were only allowed to eat meat during the Lunar New Year. And I got this from like a Chinese paper, so I think it's right. In 1982, the average Chinese person consumed 13 kilograms of meat per year. In 2016, this number reached 63 kilograms per year, and the number is expected to rise. Right? Experts at the advocacy group Wild Aid say that average annual meat consumption in China is on track to rise by another 60 pounds by 2030. Yet, per capita meat consumption in China is still half of that in the United States. Why am I talking about consumption? I know we're talking about producers. Because government restrictions are reducing and production is rising, which is making the meat more affordable and available. That's why people are consuming so much. China's livestock industry is responsible for producing half of the world's pork, a quarter of the world's poultry, and 10% of the world's beef. So that's like notable production, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So technically, people aren't exactly sure how much livestock contributes to the country's mammoth carbon emissions. Like, China is still up there. But a study published in Nature.com by Du et al., the total damage cost of greenhouse gases plus ammonia, $54.8 billion, is equal to nearly 50% of the gross annual value of ruminant production in China. So for every $1 $1 or something they earn from producing ruminants, they lose 50 cents. Even with all this, China is still unable to meet its current domestic demand for meats. What do you think about that?
And I think the buying power, middle class in China is now like increasing.
Yes. I never even thought of this before we were researching for this episode. But apparently being rich leads people to eat more meat. That's crazy. Like I can see buying cars or going on vacation. But I never thought in my mind, so when people level up, they're like, all right, bring me the meat, motherfuckers. I'm done with this vegetable nonsense.
But it's true, isn't it? It's like, bring me the $100 steak, bring me the $500 steak.
Yes.
So I think, of course, it makes a difference because food is also, your quality of food changes when you become richer. Like the quality of everything changes. Yeah. So I think that might be it.
Yeah, you're probably right. So let's shift over to some sustainable people, and y'all know we about to hop over to Europe because clearly those people know what they're doing. I know they're not perfect, right? I know Europe is not perfect, but unfortunately that's who we have right now. The European Union is a big producer of meat. We all agree, particularly pork and beef. Like I said, for beef alone, they are number 2. For meat in general, I think they're like number 5. They currently export a lot of the pig meat products that they produce, and its exports have been boosted by the fall in production in Asia because they have African swine fever decimating millions of animals. Yet, somehow Europe has some of the most sustainable meat regulation and practices globally. They base it on 3 things: reducing environmental impact, maintaining high animal welfare, and optimizing the resources used, which we saw an example of that when Ajwa talked about consumption in France. So a great example is the production of biogas from animal byproducts. The Danish government in 2009 created the so-called Green Pact, which aims to use at least 50% of animal metabolites for energy purposes by 2020. Other EU countries are becoming more active in this field. Specialized energy production programs for dairy cattle are currently being developed in the Netherlands. And I don't know if this was like earlier this year or last year, Denmark was threatening to start taxing meats. So like even at restaurants and things like that, which I don't know if that ever came to fruition, but I saw it in the news and I just remembered it now. In Germany, which accounts for a large part of the production of renewable energy from biogas in the EU, biogas plants for animal waste manage 12% of cattle manure and 16.5% of pig manure. I know it doesn't seem like a big number, but considering that biogas isn't as popular yet as it could be, this is kind of good news, right? It's leading us in the right direction. So over 11.2 thousand new biogas plants were built in EU countries between 2009 and 2017. Some of them are even going a step further and trying to see if they can just start producing meat with almost no impact on the environment. We'll see how that goes. There is a directive on how much nitrates can be produced as a result of livestock farming. So think manure and crops for feed. So that's them kind of implementing more restrictions, you know what I mean? Not to mention, of course, the animal protection law for livestock were some of the first in the world, the laws that they have in Europe, like in places like France. So a recent study by ID Tech X found that animals account for 17% of global caloric consumption, while plant-based food supply provides 83% of global caloric intake. Just 33% of global protein intakes comes from meat and dairy. Yeah, we have more of a problem, right, with meat production than we do with plant production. Why do you think this is, girl?
I think personally that one of the biggest issues why meat production is such a big problem is land. Now, we know that research suggests that if everyone shifted to a plant-based diet, we would reduce global land use for agriculture by 75%.
Right.
Now, this large reduction of agricultural land use would obviously be possible thanks to a reduction in land use that is done for grazing and a smaller need. The research also shows that cutting out beef and dairy by substituting chicken, eggs, fish, or any plant-based food has a much larger impact than if you eliminated chicken or fish. So I personally think that if meat wasn't taking that much land as it does right now, I think it'd be a lot more sustainable because it's not.
Yeah. Speaking of stuff like this, I think what is most important is a circular economy, right? That really comes into play because just eliminating meat isn't necessarily going to do what we think it'll do. The optimal production of human edible proteins per hectare of land without depleting resources or biodiversity stands at an 88-12 ratio of plant-based to animal-based proteins. But if we had a food system with more of a closed loop, like if it was a perfectly closed loop, where all available plant biomass is unlocked by using the digestive capacity of livestock, this ratio would shift to like 55-45. We would be able to eat more meat, but take better care of the environment than we do right now. So I mean, that's crazy, you know what I mean? So let's talk about some solutions before you wrap up the episode. Just some things that scientists recommend from the industry and also people in the industry as well. We need to do more holistic grazing so that livestock can graze on grass in one pasture and move to another as the soil recovers naturally, which is something that they use in developing nations. Just, more planned holistic grazing. We also need more water and energy recycling programs. We could use less chemicals like pesticides and antibiotics. Remember, guys, genetic and crossbreeding could help this. Of course, more grass-fed rather than grain-fed, which is debatable because you do need a certain amount of grain-fed or else you just have tons of pasture that you're using for nothing. So it's half and half. Also, more locally produced meats so that food doesn't have to travel so much. Again, something that's debatable because in some instances, exporting can cut down the environmental costs. Genuine free-range farming is also better because animal welfare is important, and also these livestock can roam and they can grow naturally. And then, of course, lower impact meats, like we talked about. Switch out some of your meat and your lamb for chicken and pig. And, of course, wild sourced meat, like game meats. I'm a big fan of game meat. I love the taste. Some people don't like the taste, but I do. And then, of course, there's pasture-based systems, which are similar to grazing systems, but they really try to emphasize that closed loop. So the industry is one thing, the farming is one thing, but for those of us looking to eat less meat, maybe substitute some of our meats, but we love the taste, where can we look? I'm talking about me.
Well, I mean, for starters, girl, go get yourself that Impossible Whopper. It now costs the same price.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we have Impossible Meat. Then we have Beyond Meat. They're all very viable options. I have tried them. It's actually pretty decent.
Yeah, I haven't tried Impossible Meat, but I love Beyond Meat. I used their ground beef, and it's delicious. My sister put me on, and I couldn't believe it. It's pretty good, guys.
Yeah, no. The mincemeat, definitely, I would say go with Beyond Meat. But anyway, there are so many viable options that I think you guys should just check it out, whatever is available locally, shop local. So I'm pretty sure you guys can do it.
Yeah.
And there's already people who are working on their vegetarian and vegan meals. They are also making content for all of us. So this week, instead of an organization, we wanted to list some online content creators who had some great recipes for people looking to make the switch from meat to just eat a little less meat, not even just completely give it up. So I'm just going to let Ala take the lead on it because she seems to be a little too excited about this.
I am excited. So I'm going to plug the Chic Natural. She has a good following on YouTube, and she does all types of natural skincare, hair care, which is why I fuck with her, because I have natural 4C hair, you know what I mean? And I like to keep my stuff exciting. But she also makes a lot of really cool vegan food, and her recipe for cauliflower wings are the best cauliflower wings I've ever tasted, which is saying something.
It is saying something. If you're coming for wings like that, you better walk your talk.
Yeah, exactly. You have to walk your talk. And that cauliflower wings recipe, guys, she is definitely walking her talk. I'm also going to plug my sister. Her Instagram is called IC_everything. And it's IC, the letters, and then _everything. And she's lifestyle and food and just living healthy, living your life, being beautiful. And then I'm going to plug Rainbow Life. She has a website and she also has YouTube, and she does exclusively vegetarian and vegan food. She She's American, but her parents are Indian, and she has this red lentil recipe, and I love lentils. I actually always make the Ethiopian kind, but her red lentil curry slaps. I love it. It's very good.
Okay. And the one person that I would like to mention is Lucy Watson. I started watching this show when I was in England. It's called Made in Chelsea. She comes from there. She actually wrote a book about changing your lifestyle to making it vegan. And she shares some really cool recipes. She'll share how she was able to do it. Again, she has a book called Awakenings on vegan lifestyle. So do check her out.
I will.
Now that we've talked about meat and textile, of course, the next one we have to talk about, because this series might as well be called Hot Topic, because that's all we're talking about. We're going to be talking about tourism.
Yay!
The effect that it has on the environment. And of course, when we talk about tourism, we will have to talk about ecotourism and the different aspects that there are to it. So do catch us then, please.
Yes, definitely check us out. So we've talked about alternative brands and creators making recipes. Are there places you prefer to shop for sustainable meat or meat options, like meat alternatives? Let us know, because I am trying to do better, guys. Ajwa is already ahead of me, but she'll take your recommendations as well. If you have questions, suggestions, hit us up. We always want to hear. That is the show, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary listeners. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes, as well as references on everything we talked about today. Email us, leave a voicemail, rate, and review us. If you have any questions about meat consumption, we would love to hear them for the next episode. Follow us on Twitter at planetpolicypal, Instagram at planetpolicypals, and like our Facebook page. And until then,
keep learning, pals!